Before we start with the second session, this is just to inform that those who have to submit their travel documents are requested to submit the bills at the travel desk, which is near the registration counter outside. You can do that after the session also.
Repeat it once more.
I will repeat. Before we start with the second session, this is just to inform that those who have to submit their travel documents are requested to submit the bills at the travel desk, which is near the registration counter outside. You can do it after the session. Robert Fulghum once said, "All I really need to know about how to live and what to do and how to be, I learned in kindergarten." For our second session on our preschools or schools ready for children, our focus will be on quality issues across sectors. For this session, the emphasis based on evidence is on the significance of good quality and inclusive early childhood and early primary education and smooth transition between the two. We welcome our Chief, Professor A.K. Sharma, former Director of NCERT, and our speakers, Professor Vinita Kaul, Director of CECED, Ambedkar University, Dr. Suman Bhattacharya ji from ASA Center, Dr. Eni Koshi, Principal of St. Mary's School, Mr. Sasha Priyo from Bodh Shiksha Samiti, and Mr. Krishnan from Center Square Foundation.
Our chair for this session, Professor A.K. Sharma, was associated with National Council of Education Research and Training, NCERT, for about 25 years in various capacities and retired as its director in 1999. He has been involved in various policy making and implementation initiatives of the Government of India in various facets of school education and teacher education. Now I request Professor A.K. Sharma to introduce our speaker for this session.
Distinguished participants, it's my privilege to be associated with this national conference on a very important theme for discussions. The three themes which have been laid down for deliberations during this conference are our children ready for school? Are preschool or schools ready for children? And are families and communities ready for school? All the three themes are so interlocked that they determine exactly what the kind of quality of preschool education it should be possible to offer to our children at that age. We have 5 speakers for this session, and we have 100 minutes. A few minutes will go in my onerous job of introducing these learned speakers. So we will have roughly about 17 minutes to each speaker. And I would like to begin this with Professor Vinita Kaul as the first speaker. And it's my pleasant duty to briefly introduce her to this audience. Professor Vinita Kaul is presently Professor and Director of School of Education Studies and Founder Director of Center for Early Childhood Education and Development, CECED, at the Ambedkar University, Delhi. Prior to this assignment, Professor Kaul's past assignments include positions of Senior Education Specialist in the World Bank and Professor and Head of the Department of Preschool and Elementary Education at the NCERT. She has led several education projects within and outside India and has been on several national and international committees. Professor Kaul is a PhD from IIT Delhi in psychology and has several national and international publications in education to her credit. Ladies and gentlemen, my credentials to be chairing this session today is that I was once a former colleague of Professor Vanita Kaul, from whom I picked up a few tidbits in the area of early childhood care and education, and it's a very amazing situation that we have 5 learned speakers to speak on different dimensions of quality. I'll give my own limited understandings on these issues at the end of all the speakers have spoken, but let us hear them first, and I call Professor Vanita Kaul first.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm like the minister, nobody's responding. Okay. Maybe somebody says good afternoon and wakes up. No? Thank you very much, Professor Sharma. I have only 15 minutes, I think, no? So I should get on to the job straight. Before I get on to this, I would just like to say that this is in continuation of the previous session's presentation that was done by my colleague Aparajita Bharkar, where she shared the presentation on Are Children Ready for School? There was a lot of comment on the fact that it's not the children who are ready for school, it's the schools that have to be ready for children. And we fully agree with that. The reason why we posed this question was because that gives us the evidence to take up the schools or the preschools and say, are you really ready for the children at the level at which they are, at the level of development, at the level of awareness, at the level of capability at which those children are when they come into the school system at the age of 5 years. That was the relevance of the 5 years because in 23 out of how many states we have? 37, right? Whatever number of states in UTs, the age for admission to class 1 is 5 years, whereas the RTE talks about 6 years. And somebody in the morning mentioned that in many countries, schooling starts at 7 years. So somewhere, are we not rushing the kids? I think that is something to be kept in mind. And if we are, because it is important for them to come into the school system or any preschool or school system, then is our curriculum, is our program really child appropriate, child friendly, age appropriate? So these are the questions in front of us. Another omission that was there in the morning, which was Prajita told me was not an omission because it was the logo was there, but I'm just trying to make up for it. That when we talked of our partners, we forgot to mention our 2 very important partners from Assam and from Andhra. That is Andhra Mahila Sabha and CECED Regional Office, Assam. So without them, without UNICEF, without Assar Center, we would not have been able to do this study. So I acknowledge their contribution, immense contribution to this study. Now, what we did in this, in the morning, she talked about children ready. Now we wanted to know, are the programs ready for children? Are the schools ready? So what we did was, how did we decide on the programs that we were going to be selecting? We followed up the children. We followed the children to where they were going. It was interesting that even if children's names were registered, say, in the Anganwadi, but it was not necessary that they were going to the Anganwadis. So we actually identified, selected a sample and followed them to whichever facility they were going to. Also keeping in mind the efficiency of our whole sampling design, that we selected those preschool programs which had at least 5 children in that school, so that we would be able to look at it more comprehensively and not have to follow each individual child. Keeping that in mind, we identified the schools, and what we came up with were private schools, Anganwadis, and a few NGO programs or other innovative programs. How did we look at the quality? We looked at the quality in terms of we have developed in CECED Early Childhood Education Quality Assessment Scale. As Aprajita mentioned in the morning, that this is a multi-strand study which has 3 strands. So what was presented largely in the morning was from strand A and part of it from strand B. The strand B was a quasi-experimental where we looked at the impact of quality, I may not say impact, the association of quality with children's school readiness levels and subsequent learning outcomes. So for the purpose of assessing quality, we developed an instrument called the Early Childhood Education Quality Assessment Scale, which covers 3 major domains: school and classroom, teacher disposition, and curricular transaction. I'll not go into the detail of it. And this requires the researcher to spend a whole day, one whole day, in the classrooms, wherever the program is happening, observe and make their review and make their ratings on that scale. This gives us data on not only whether on the rating scale, but it also what we have added to this is a dimension of time on task. So it also gives a sense of what was happening in the classroom and for what length of time in terms of actual activities. Just to deviate a little, when we were following up these children, one of the things I would like to mention is that the schools that we went to, or the preschools that we went to, whether private or Anganwadi, the fact that 5 children were supposed to be there as our criterion made it very selective in the sense that these were the preschools that were actually working, which were functional. So especially in the case of Anganwadis, there were a number of Anganwadis which were not functional. So what we have here for the Anganwadis is the functional Anganwadis, and similarly to an extent with the private schools. What we find, I think it was mentioned in the morning by Rukmani, that there was a large-scale preference for private schooling, starting from preschool, and children were found to be following multiple pathways. So when we talk about this early childhood stage, when we say that a 3 to 4-year-old will go to a pre-nursery and a 4 to 5 will go to a nursery and a 5 to 6 will go to a KG and then go on to class 1, that's all on paper. Actual reality is that children are actually taking multiple pathways, so that you may have a situation, we did have a situation where you may have 4-year-olds in primary school and you may have a 7-year-old still in preschool, especially in private schools, because sometimes they tend to keep them longer. So there isn't, when you talk of policy and when you talk of practice, there is a huge gap. Another very interesting trend we saw was that, which I'll just show here, that Anganwadi, the poorest of the poor, these are all in rural areas of the 3 states, and the poorest of the poor send their children to Anganwadis at the age of 3, or if they are better off, to private schools. And around the age of 4 years, there is large-scale migration to private schools or to government schools. So they're too poor to send their children to private schools, then they sit in the government schools as underage children. So this is the data which you can see on what was the emerging sample of the program. As you can see from the data, Anganwadi centers at age 4, there were 165 children. At age 5, it came down to 42. And the program is supposed to cater up to 6 years. And at age 7, and then of course it receded further. Whereas private schools, if you see, from 97, it jumped to 153 by the time the child was 5 years old. And the same scenario for the government, because in all the 3 states, 5 years, 5+ is the age for children coming into class 1, irrespective of the RTE, and you find the jump from 4 to 143. The other programs had negligible presence. Before we get into what did we find the schools or preschools ready for children or not, I would like to share with you what came out of our data on the basis of regression analysis, that what is it that really makes a difference in terms of school readiness? What are those attributes of a good school or a good preschool that make a difference, that is statistically making a difference in terms of the performance of school readiness levels at age 5 and then subsequent learning levels all the way up to grade 8. Age 8. What we find is, this is from 2 strands, strand B, where this data is coming from, which is more quantitative, And then I'll present a glimpse of strand C, where we did the 9 case studies. I think Prajita mentioned in the morning. Moni is here, and she led that activity. And what were the learnings from there? So first I would like to just present what is the kind of image of a good preschool or a primary school, and then go on to what is actually happening. So I will not go again into the details of it, but the major domains that came out to be very significantly associated with school readiness levels at age 5 were physical infrastructure. Many people tend to undermine the value of physical infrastructure, but we realize that if we want to have any kind of classroom organization, any kind of planning, any kind of activities, you can't do it under the tree. So there has to be some minimum infrastructure that has to be there to be able to run a program, but it is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for quality. The more necessary also is classroom planning. This emerged as a very, very significant variable. Classroom planning has to be more age and development appropriate. There has to be some sort of a schedule. In many of the programs, we found no schedule, very unplanned kind of classroom practice. But what emerged, wherever there was a weekly, daily schedule, there was some age developmental appropriateness of activities, there was some individual planning for children, and there was a classroom arrangement which facilitated, so there was a flexibility in the classroom arrangement which facilitated both group and individual activities that was conducive for quality and conducive for developing school readiness in children. We've already heard from Aprajita, what were we looking at in terms of school readiness. In terms of teacher, very clearly what stood out was a democratic and interactive teacher stands out as a very significant input into any kind of a good quality program. Another indicator that came out was that teacher introduces any new concept very innovatively, asks children questions and encourages children's questions, promotes higher order thinking by helping children extend their thinking, whatever as part of their conversation activities or otherwise, so that they are able to imagine beyond what they are at the moment saying or thinking. In terms of curricular transaction, opportunity for creative and divergent thinking, opportunity for children to participate in both group and individual activities, a very significant, and this has come from other sources of other literature sources as well, as a very significant association with free play, free choice play for children, because that has its own value for the early education of children. So opportunities for free play according to their choice, and interaction with children during play, and activities for number readiness and learning mathematics concepts, which is again hinting at the fact that there is need for some sort of structured activities which are planned, play activities which are planned to help children develop these competencies, which are part of the school readiness. When we look at the strand C lessons, we find that the quality of the preschool program, what is it determined by? 3 important factors come through. One is the quality of the teacher. I think Professor Menon mentioned in the morning, a very key input. The quality of the curriculum and the linkage between the preschool and the community. This is on the basis of 9 case studies that a community of researchers undertook, some of whom are here as well. And on that basis, after a study of those good case studies, we came out with these common attributes. Some programs focused on building strong relationship between the home and the preschool to facilitate children's participation and learning, which obviously reflects the very good understanding of how children learn and how it is not just a school that has to, or a preschool that has the total responsibility, but it is a partnership between parents and children, parents and the school, and they have to be brought into the picture. Also, community-based programs which operated on democratic principles. So a democratic teacher, freedom, independence, choice, these are very key words that come in here. In terms of preschool teachers, what they should be and how they should be facilitated, initial training must be followed by recurrent short trainings to build capacity of teachers. Basically, normally in our system, we have these one-shot trainings. In the Anganwadi system, you have the job training and then you have the refresher. But many Anganwadi workers never get to the refresher. They're only confined to the job training. Whereas here in these good practices that were followed up, recurrent training was a very, very significant component of the program. Not only training, but a very good combination of training, mentoring, and supervision, supportive supervision, because mentoring by teachers or mentors who themselves have the hands-on experience and are actually able to serve as role models and demonstrate good practice is very key. So how do we build teacher educators who can be as effective mentors is a very big question. Administrative supervision was not enough. They had to be supported, again, by regular mentoring and with reflection. I think another key word to be seen is reflection, because there has to be some kind of opportunities to reflect on their own practice together with the mentor and be able to see where they can make a difference. So these were some of the findings. In terms of pedagogy and curriculum, age and developmental appropriateness of activities was very important. It was also a very significant aspect that we would like to highlight here is that when we say that children are not ready, we are not saying there is some intrinsic deficit in children that makes them not ready. It is essentially the deficit in the programs. So young children, they require these skills only largely if they are from an environment where they are not getting it otherwise, through a good quality preschool curriculum. So the curriculum has to take cognizance of these competencies. A good curriculum provides for free play and guided activities, a language-rich environment. It is extremely important to be able to have children immerse in the language in which they are going to be learning. And here we had a very interesting presentation in the morning by Professor Mohanty, which really raises a lot of challenges. A lot of learning concepts by doing, participating, and strong policies against corporal punishment. When we look at our data on the programs that we have evaluated, we come up with 3 models. I won't go into the detail because there's no time. Essentially, the government-run Anganwadis, the private preschools, and the innovative early childhood programs, which were a few, but they were there to add some variance to our sample. And what we find is that in all 3, there were many things that were common in terms of limitations of infrastructure, limitations of teachers. The teachers were not necessarily highly educated. Teachers were not necessarily very competent. Teachers were from the local communities. There was low participation in Anganwadis despite better infrastructure, but there was high teacher-pupil ratio in private schools. So this also throws up issues of how does the community and the parents really define quality? How do they make their choices about quality when they see an Anganwadi with a very nice infrastructure and they see a private school which is in shambles, and yet they send their children to the private school? So this is an interesting question that comes up. We looked at to what extent is the curriculum age appropriate. When we go into the specifics, what we see is, as you can see from this data, that the 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, and 7 years, you would expect to see some sort of a differentiation across ages. You would see some progression so that the children are in readiness and then they get on to the basics and so on and so forth. But here you don't see that differentiation at all. So what you see is at 4-year-olds, the dominant practice is formal teaching. 5-year-olds, formal teaching. 6-year-olds expected, may not be desired, but expected. Formal teaching, and 7-year-olds again. So the 2 basic categories of activities that stand out, one is formal teaching of the 3 hours, and the other is routine activities or no activity. It's sad that a lot of time in these centers is going into either that or, so that if you look at the play-based activities, you will hardly see any presence of that. So this is something that is really a matter of concern. One doesn't also see any outdoor play across. When you say play-based activities, however, when we come to different kinds of programs, we would find that there are some innovative practices, and we have both Shala here, Sasha is here. So here, as you can see, the blue